Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaign review, this time covering Drazhoath the Ashen. So this campaign starts at the Black Fortress in the southern parts of the Darklands, and you start at war with the Darkland Orcs, which is a minor greenskin faction. Now these guys here are nothing more than a punching bag, however this starting position is probably the most challenging of the three Chaos Dwarf Legendary Lords, not because of these guys, but because of what happens afterwards. You're surrounded by people that hate you, and so you're either going to be on war at all sides, or you need to hit the ground running and basically strike them before they get a chance to strike you. You know, there's Grimgor Ironhide over here, which will pretty much immediately declare war on you as soon as you set up some caravans, or, well, sorry, convoys. Just depends on how lucky you are. You've got Imric over here, who will again also declare war on you. These ogres over here tend to declare war on you. Thorgrim Grudgebearer declares war on you. But there are a few potential allies in the area. You can be friends with Tretch. I usually don't be friends with Tretch because his province is quite rich and I want it. It does cause me to end up going to war with Thorgrim though. But my usual go-to ally in this area is actually Clan Morts, which I'll get into in a bit. Now, my recommendation for occupying the Sentinels is turn that into a factory, since this settlement here is very valuable, and it tends to come under attack a fair bit, and making it a fortress means it's a minor city battle instead of a field battle, which is way easier to defend for the Chaos Dwarves. And I'd also recommend as your first building to build the Hobgoblin building, because you want to get Gordhar's Backstabber as early as possible, because you're not going to just spam Chaos Dwarf units. You're just not going to be able to do it. You don't have enough armaments. So you're going to need other types of troops, either laborers or hobgoblins, and my recommendation would be go with hobgoblins. Now, Gordhar's Backstabber does require upkeep, which is rare for a legendary lord. Most of them are actually free of upkeep, but Gordhar's provides so much for an army of hobgoblins that it's totally worth it. So my recommendation, yeah, try to get Gordhar's as quickly as possible. Spam the sneaky gits because they're really good against Imric. So then after that, takes 2 turns to get down to the Darkhold, at which point there I would recommend turning that into an outpost because this is fairly safe. And you want to put your safest areas as outposts because they're not likely to come under attack. And then they're not easy to defend, those settlements. Then after that, if you want to go after Tretch, you can catch him here on turn 5. He'll occupy this settlement. And that's very easy to actually auto-resolve that battle, which then makes the rest of the fight quite easy, but it's entirely up to you. Then there's Imric over here. So my recommendation would be, before fighting Imric, is build up your armies as large as they possibly can, and then launch the attack. Get as many sneaky gits as you possibly can, and what you want to do is sneak around his army, and when his archers are isolated from the rest of his melee units, charge in the sneaky gits and smash him. It's actually a very easy battle if you do that. After you've taken out Imric, you may end up having to occupy Bitter Bay, because sometimes Imric occupies that. If he does, my recommendation would be to sell it to Clan Moors for either a ton of money or a defensive alliance. It's entirely up to you. I actually go with the defensive alliance, and I'm usually pretty good friends with Clan Moors for the entire campaign, which is unusual because I usually hate allying with Skaven, but it worked out pretty fine in my campaigns. And then, of course, there's just more and more war declarations will happen as it goes on. It's a very aggressive campaign, but you've got a lot of tools at your disposal. So let's look at Drazhoath's stats and traits and see what he has to offer. So he's got the trait Tyrant of the Black Tower, which gives campaign movement range plus 10%, reduced upkeep costs for Kadai units in his army, and passive ability Dark Renown, which provides a melee attack buff in a 35-meter radius, which is really good. That buffs any unit. Then his skill tree here, probably one of the meatiest out of the Chaos Dwarfs. So you've got generic blue line, generic red line, generic melee line, generic spell line of Hashut, but it's boosted up here in his unique line. So in his unique line here, which I think this one here is the most powerful out of all of the unique lines for the Chaos Dwarfs, you've got research rate plus 10%, construction time -1 for all buildings, minimum 1 turn, local province, construction cost -15 for all buildings, local province. So that's really good because you want to get those reduced construction costs. Then we got We Are Legion, which gives armament cost -25% for increasing capacity of Infernal Guard and Infernal Ironsworn units. So even if you're not putting these units in your army, then you're still getting a global bonus to keep those armament costs down, because you're always going to want to just keep getting more of your better units, and you know, making it cheaper is just really good, because you're going to want to use your entire roster across the various armies that you build. You don't necessarily want to put one of each type of unit in one army. It's entirely up to you if you want to do that though, but you want to recruit as many types of units. Otherwise you end up with a unit that is costing a ridiculous amount of armaments while some are just left behind with cheap costs, so try to make use of them all. Then he's also got reduced upkeep cost and bonus versus infantry for Infernal Guard and Ironsworn units. So then we've got the Greed of Asgore, which gives income from cities plus 10% faction-wide, raw material output plus 10% faction-wide. No downside to that. Very good skill. Then you've got Master of Hell, if I could just get it. Armament cost minus 25% for increasing capacity of Kadai units, weapon strength, and physical resistance for all Kadai units, of which there are two. There's the Destroyer and the Kadai Fireborn, both of which I think are really good units, but the Kadai Fireborn are quite squishy, so you just got to be careful with them because they get shot very easily. Then you've got the ability Ashen, which gives hit points plus 10%, wound recovery time minus 2, and barrier hit point plus 600. Now, funny thing about this particular skill is that barrier hit points are augmented at the same rate that your hit points are augmented. So if your hit points are being augmented by 10%, that also means that your barrier hit points are being augmented by 10%. So you actually end up with 660 barrier hit points with that, more if you've also gotten Survivalist. Then you've got Long Years of Exile, which gives Winds of Magic cost minus 6 for Flames of Asgore, and then the upgraded version gets minus 9. So this spell here is, in my opinion, the best spell in the lore of Hashut, and he is able eventually to get the Winds of Magic cost for the non-overcasted version down to 5 and the overcasted version down to 7, making it just ridiculously cheap, especially considering it's quite possible for the Chaos Dwarfs to have just ridiculous amounts of power reserves. So making Drazhoath the Ashen into a one-man Doomstack is actually very much a possibility. He can take out so many units with that spell. Then you've got his mount Cinderbreath, which is a really good Bale Taurus, really powerful mount there. In terms of his items, first one is the Graven Scepter, which gives control plus 3 local province, which is really good for Chaos Dwarfs because keeping the control nice and high, especially in the higher difficulties, will stop the laborers from escaping or getting killed or whatever it is that they do when they're lost. And then you've got melee attack plus 5 and the Graven Scepter ability here, which gives melee attack plus 24, 25% extra weapon strength, and imbues magical attack. That's a very good ability. Then you got the Demon Spite Crucible, which gives passive ability Demon Spite Crucible, which as you kill entities, so basically one cast of Flames of Asgore, it increases your spell mastery, so you can, after one cast, essentially cast even more powerful versions of the Flames of Asgore. Targeting range plus 10% for Lore of Hashut spells, leadership plus 5 for Lord's Army, and spell resistance plus 15%. Then we've got the Hellshard Amulet over here. Passive ability Hellshard Amulet, which gives damage resistance and melee damage reflection, but is only enabled while he's in melee. So this is something that can be bypassed if he's being shot while not in melee. So that's something that while you're on Cinderbreath you need to be a little bit aware of. Because typically speaking, he doesn't get shot when he's on foot, unless you're playing on the lower battle difficulties, because then the AI will actually shoot you. Then you've got Winds of Magic Power Reserve Capacity plus 5, Ward Save plus 5% for Lord's Army. Very good items, I think. And if we have a look at his set bonus, melee attack plus 5 for embedded Infernal Castellan heroes, all armies faction-wide, enemy leadership minus 5, enemy armies in the region. So really good. Now, I'd actually go so far as to say with all of this buffs here, based on old criteria that I would usually judge a Legendary Lord, that Drazhoath the Ashen actually qualifies as a 10 out of 10 Legendary Lord. He is amazing on the battlefield. He boosts his army by an amazing degree, and he boosts his faction by an absolute ton. So just a really good Legendary Lord, and I would go so far as to say he's a 10 out of 10 Legendary Lord. Then if we go over here to his faction effects, we've got Sentinel of Ashes, which gives armament cost reduction minus 10% for all unit capacity upgrades in the Hellforge. So just amplifying his already very large bonuses he's providing. You can increase a lot, get just an absolute ton of units in the later stages of the campaign once you actually start making a good amount of armaments. And then of course you've got an extra 10% armament output. Now another thing to his campaign, which isn't obvious and people have to point out in the previous video, is that with this particular campaign, for every tower that you have, you'll also gain an additional 5% research rate, and Zartan the Black apparently gets 3% extra casualty replenishment rate faction-wide for every tower that he has. I missed that yesterday. And apparently Astrogoth gets nothing from his towers, nothing bonus. But yeah, overall, I really enjoy this campaign. It's one I would recommend the most for if you're deciding on which Chaos Dwarf Legendary Lord to pick, I'd go with Drazhoath the Ashen. It's the most fun in my opinion, but of course that's a subjective point of view. Not everyone's going to agree with this. You know, if it's your first campaign, you don't really know what you're doing with the Chaos Dwarfs, maybe just play on a lower difficulty, but I find that this campaign just has a lot to do, and I'm actually playing into the later stages of the campaign, which is something that in pretty much all of the cases, I usually quit my campaigns by turn, say, 40, 50, because I usually just get bored, but I'm on like turn 60-ish at the moment, and I'm still enjoying my campaign, which for me in Warhammer 3 is extremely rare, so really can't recommend Drazhoath the Ashen more than what I'm currently doing. So anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Drazhoath the Ashen, whether you agree or disagree with my assessment. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.